Anyone but him. That's what my sister said to me the summer I turned 17, in the dark of our shared bedroom, her voice flat and certain. Like she was stating a law of physics, instead of asking a favor. I laughed. I remember laughing, actually laughing, because it seemed like the easiest promise I would ever make. Ethan Cole was just Claire's friend, the boy who ate cereal out of our cabinets without asking, who left his sneakers by our back door. A fixture of our house, the way the creaky third stair was a fixture. Falling for him would have made about as much sense as falling for the stair. 9 years later, I was standing outside my sister's rehearsal dinner in a downpour that had ruined my hair, my mascara, and possibly my whole life. And Ethan's hand was still warm against my waist, from where he'd caught me stumbling off a curb. And I understood, with the kind of clarity that only shows up once it's far too late to be useful, that I had broken that promise a long time ago. I just hadn't said it out loud. Not yet. I'm Maya Whitfield, 26 years old, a labor and delivery nurse at a hospital 40 minutes outside the town I grew up in. In 9 days, my older sister Claire was going to marry a steady, kind, slightly boring man named Jason under the oak tree in our parents' backyard, the same tree we used to dare each other to climb. I was the maid of honor. Ethan, 6'2", easy grin, criminally bad taste in flannel, was the best man. He had been Claire's best friend since the 7th grade, closer to her than most of our actual family, close enough that he called our mother Ma and still had a key to the house. We had known each other my whole adult life. He drove me to the night I broke my wrist trying to skateboard at 19. I sat with him in a hospital hallway the night his father had his first heart attack, holding a vending machine coffee neither of us drank. We had the ordinary, accumulated kind of history you don't examine too closely because it's just always been there. Like weather. What we did not have, what I had promised at 17 we would never have, was each other. The trouble, if you want to call it that, started 3 weeks before the wedding, when Claire asked Ethan and me to handle the rehearsal logistics together because, in her words, "You two actually get along, unlike me and every vendor in this county." We met at a diner to go over the seating chart. He showed up late, hair still wet from the gym, apologizing with a stack of napkins he'd stolen to use as extra place cards because he'd forgotten the real ones in his car. "You're an idiot," I told him, and he grinned like it was a compliment. "I'm the best man, I contain multitudes." We worked for 2 hours. Somewhere in the second hour, I stopped noticing the seating chart and started noticing the way he tapped his pen against his jaw when he was thinking, the low rasp of his laugh. How he still remembered, unprompted, that I hated cilantro and picked it off my plate before I even asked. It wasn't new information. I had simply spent 9 years refusing to file it under anything but friendship. "You're staring," he said, not looking up. "I'm strategizing." "Table 4 is a disaster. Table 4 is fine, you're staring." I looked back down at the seating chart. My face was hot. I told myself it was the diner's terrible ventilation. That night I told Priya everything, not the whole truth, not yet, just the outline of it. An old promise. A diner. A feeling I'd apparently been quietly outrunning for the better part of a decade. She was sitting cross-legged on our couch with a bowl of cereal at 11 at night. The way she did most nights, she needed to think through a problem that wasn't even hers to solve. "So let me get this straight," she said. "You made a promise at 17 because you assumed you'd never actually want the thing you were promising to give up. Basically. And now you want the thing." "I didn't say that." "You didn't. Have to." "You've said his name 4 times in the last 10 minutes, and you don't even like talking about work that much." She set the bowl down. "Maya. 9 years is a long time to keep a promise you made before you'd even had your first real heartbreak. People change. Feelings change. Does the promise get to just stay frozen forever because you were scared once?" "It's not that simple." Claire asked me for a reason. "I don't know what the reason is, but I know it mattered to her." "Then ask her." "I can't ask her 4 weeks before her wedding why she doesn't want me dating her best friend." "That's insane timing." "There's no good timing for that conversation, Maya. There's just the timing you eventually run out of room to avoid. She picked the cereal back up. I'm just saying, you've spent 9 years building a wall around one feeling. At some point, you have to ask whether the wall is protecting her, or just protecting you from finding out the answer. I didn't have anything to say to that. I went to bed and didn't sleep much, which, looking back, was probably the truest answer I could have given her. 2 weeks out, we were up on ladders in Claire's backyard, hanging string lights, because Ethan didn't trust the rental company's work, and Claire didn't trust anyone with a task list who wasn't me. It was nearly 10 at night. The lights kept tangling. My hands kept brushing his on the ladder rungs, and every single time, something in my chest did an undignified little lurch. Can I tell you something, he said from 3 rungs above me, and you won't make it weird. No promises. I used to think you hated me, like genuinely. Every family thing you'd be polite, but there was this wall. And then a few years back it just wasn't there anymore, and I never figured out why, and it's driven me a little insane. I nearly fell off the ladder, because I knew exactly why. The wall had been the promise. 17-year-old me, terrified of an easy thing turning complicated, had built it brick by brick, and at some point in my 20s, without deciding to, I had stopped adding bricks. I had let it fall. I didn't hate you, I said carefully. I was just being careful. Careful of what? I didn't answer, he didn't push. But he looked at me a beat too long before he went back to the lights, and the air between us felt different for the rest of the night. Charged, the way the sky gets before weather actually arrives. 4 days before that, at the final dress fitting, Claire stood on a pedestal in the boutique's back room while I knelt at her hem with a mouthful of pins. And she caught my eye in the mirror, wearing an expression I couldn't quite place. You've been different lately, she said, to the mirror instead of to me, the way we always seem to deliver our hardest questions. Different how? Lighter. Like there's something new in your life. Is there someone I'm going to be hearing about at the reception? My mouth went dry around the pins. No one worth mentioning. She studied her own reflection for a moment, smoothing the lace at her waist. Good, she said, and there was something underneath the word I didn't examine closely enough at the time, relief, maybe, or a warning, or both. I need this week to go smoothly, Maya. No surprises. I promised her it wouldn't, and I meant it, the way you mean things right before they stop being true. The night everything nearly broke was the night of the combined bachelor-bachelorette party, 4 days before the wedding. At a bar downtown, Claire had rented out for 20 people, who mostly just wanted an excuse to day drink into evening. Ethan drove me home. It should have been nothing. He'd driven me home 100 times. We sat in his car outside my building for a long time after he put it in park, neither of us reaching for the door handle, the engine ticking as it cooled. Maya, don't. I don't know why I said it. Some instinct in me heard my name in his voice and knew, immediately, what would follow if I let it continue. I'm not doing anything. You're about to, he laughed low, more breath than sound. Fine, then you say it. Tell me I'm wrong. I turned to look at him, and that was my first mistake, because up close, in the orange wash of a streetlight, his face was doing something I'd never let myself study before, open, unguarded, waiting. Ethan, just tell me I'm wrong and I'll drop it forever, I mean that. I opened my mouth to lie. I really did intend to lie. What came out instead was silence, and then his hand was at my jaw, and then, for a few seconds that rearranged something permanent in my chest, his mouth was on mine, soft, careful. Like he'd been holding this exact question for years, and was terrified of the answer, even as he finally asked it. I pulled back first. We can't, I said, and my voice cracked in a way that made the sentence sound like a question instead of a rule. Why? Because I promised Claire, a long time ago. I promised her never you, never this. He went very still. Why would she ask you that? I don't know the whole reason. I just know it mattered enough that I said yes, and it's mattered enough that I've kept it for 9 years. And I am not going to be the reason she doesn't have a sister standing next to her at her own wedding. I got out of the car before he could answer. I did not look back to see his face. I have never regretted anything the way I regretted not looking back. 2 days later, Claire found out. Not from Ethan, not from me, from Priya, my roommate, who'd seen the two of us sitting too close at the rehearsal dinner, and, in a moment of well-meaning, catastrophic honesty, asked Claire if she was doing okay with the Ethan and Maya thing. Claire showed up at my apartment 40 minutes later. She didn't yell, that was almost worse. She stood in my kitchen with her arms crossed and her wedding 4 days away and asked, in a voice gone thin and careful, "Is it true? Claire, is it true, Maya?" I didn't act on it. Not really, not until I stopped. Until what? Until he kissed me 4 days ago. And I stopped it, Claire, I swear to you I stopped it. Because I remembered what I promised you. Then, why does it feel like you're only telling me because you got caught? I didn't have an answer for that, because it was true. And the truth sat in the room between us, like a third person. Do you even know why I asked you for that promise? Her voice was shaking now. You were 17, you never asked me why. You just said yes, like it was nothing, and I let you. Because I couldn't say the real reason out loud back then either. So tell me now. She sat down at my kitchen table like her legs had stopped being reliable. Do you remember the year Mom left? Claire, I was 8, I remember pieces. I was 11, I remember all of it. I remember the fight in the kitchen, the one where Dad found out. I remember the name he kept saying, over and over, like it wouldn't make sense no matter how many times he repeated it. Frank, his best friend since college, best man at their wedding, Maya. The person who stood up in front of everyone and promised to support their marriage. Her eyes were wet. And then he was the person Mom left with. I watched Dad become someone I didn't recognize for 2 years. I watched what it does to a family when the person who's supposed to be safest, a best friend, turns into the person who breaks everything. And I promised myself, whatever happened, I would never let that shape touch my life again. Not with my best friend, not with my sister. The kitchen was very quiet. That's why I asked you for the promise, she said. Not because I thought you'd actually want him, because I was terrified of the pattern. Because in my head, sister falls for best friend was never a romance, Maya. It was just the beginning of the story where I lose everyone. I sat down across from her, my chest aching in a way I didn't have a name for. Claire, I am not Mom, and Ethan is not Frank. You know that, you've always known that. Knowing it and feeling it are different things. I know, I said. But you can't ask me to spend my whole life proving I'm not a person from a story that happened before I could even talk. She didn't answer right away. Outside, it had started raining again, soft against the window, and I thought of the storm outside the rehearsal dinner, of Ethan's hand at my waist. Of how some things arrive the way weather does, not because you invited them, but because the conditions had been building for years. Ethan showed up an hour later. Priya, guilt-stricken, had called him. He stood in my doorway, soaked again, because apparently the universe had decided rain was our permanent condition that week, and he looked at Claire first, not me. This isn't Maya's fault, he said. I've wanted this for years, Claire, long before she ever let herself want it back. I never said anything because you're my best friend, and I wasn't going to blow up your family over a feeling I could just carry. I was fine carrying it forever if that's what it took. And now I watched her walk away from me 4 days ago because of a promise she made as a kid. To protect you from a wound that isn't even hers, and I'm done being quiet about it. Claire looked between the two of us for a long time, her best friend, her sister. The two people she'd tried hardest to protect from the worst chapter of her own life, standing in a kitchen soaked in the same rain, waiting on her answer. I'm not Mom, she finally said, so quietly I almost missed it. That's what you both keep telling me. Maybe I needed to actually hear it, out loud, to start believing it. The wedding happened 4 days later, exactly on schedule, under the oak tree, in weather that had finally, mercifully cleared. Claire married Jason in front of 40 people, and cried through her own vows, in a way that had nothing to do with any of us. During the reception, she found me by the dessert table and bumped my shoulder with hers, the old sister language for I'm not done being upset but I love you anyway. Dance with him, she said. The best man traditionally dances with the maid of honor, it's basically a rule. Since when do you like rules? Since I get to write new ones. She squeezed my hand. Go. Ethan was waiting near the string lights we'd hung together, looking, for once, nervous in a way I'd never seen on him before. I walked over, and he held out his hand like he wasn't entirely sure I'd take it. I took it. For the record, he said, as we started to move, slow and unhurried, I've loved you since the seating chart diner disaster. Possibly longer. I've just been very committed to not saying so. You have terrible timing. I have exceptional patience. There's a difference. I laughed, and something in my chest that had been braced for 9 years finally, fully let go. It's been 8 months since that wedding. Ethan and I are still figuring out what we are. In the unglamorous, ordinary way real relationships actually start: slow dinners, long phone calls. The occasional argument about whose turn it is to pick the restaurant. Claire has come to 2 of them. She still gets a look sometimes, a flicker of the old fear crossing her face when she sees us together, and I've learned not to take it personally. Because I understand now exactly what it's protecting. Some promises, I've realized, aren't really about the thing they name. They're about an old wound wearing a new name, hoping you'll keep it safe without ever having to explain why. Mine took 9 years and one rainstorm outside a rehearsal dinner to finally understand what I was actually promising to protect, and to learn that the people I loved most deserved the truth more than they deserved my silence. Sometimes, on nights when it rains, Ethan reaches for my hand without even thinking about it, an old habit built out of 100 ordinary car rides home. And I remember standing outside that rehearsal dinner soaked to the bone, terrified of a feeling I'd spent 9 years refusing to name out loud. I don't think the rain was ever really the obstacle. I think it just finally washed away everything I'd been using to hide. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If it pulled at something in you, if you found yourself holding your breath in that kitchen scene right alongside me, I'd love it if you stuck around, hit follow, or subscribe. Because there are so many more stories like this one coming. And before you go, I want to ask you something. Has anything like this ever happened to you? Has a family rule, spoken or unspoken, ever stood between you and someone you cared about, or have you watched it happen to someone close to you? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one, and I would genuinely love to hear your story.